Kai Morrison grew up in a two-bedroom apartment on the south side of Chicago in a neighborhood called Englewood, which, by the time Kai was a teenager, had earned a reputation as one of the most economically neglected zip codes in the entire city of Illinois. His mother, Sandra Morrison, worked double shifts as a registered nurse at a hospital in the Bronzeville area, which meant that for long stretches of his childhood, Kai was raising himself. His father, a man named Dennis Morrison, had walked out of the family's life when Kai was 9 years old, leaving behind a child who had learned very early that the people you love the most are often the first ones to disappear. That early wound, the kind that doesn't bleed visibly, but that shapes every decision you make for the rest of your life, would later become the exact vulnerability that someone else would quietly exploit. Before we go any further, we want to hear from you. Take a second and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Kai was not a troubled kid. That is one of the first things people who knew him back then will tell you. He was thoughtful. He was warm. He had one of those personalities that made strangers feel immediately at ease. The kind of person who remembered your name after hearing it once, who asked follow-up questions because he actually wanted to know the answer, who gave his last dollar to someone who needed it, and then went home quietly without mentioning it to anyone. His high school teachers consistently described him as one of the most empathetic students they had ever encountered. But empathy, as beautiful as it is, can also be a liability. When you feel everything deeply, you tend to believe that other people do too. And that belief, that fundamental trust in the emotional honesty of the people around you, is exactly the kind of thing that a certain type of person learns to weaponize. In the fall of his junior year at Blackwell University, a private institution on Chicago's North Shore, Kai was managing his life the way any scholarship student at a competitive school manages it, which is to say, barely. He was on a full academic merit scholarship that required him to maintain a 3.5 GPA, and he was doing it, but not without cost. He was working part-time at a campus coffee shop called the Meridian to cover living expenses his scholarship didn't touch. He was taking a heavy course load, including a communications seminar, a media ethics class, and a research assistant position under a professor in the economics department named Daniel Park. He had one real friend on campus, a pre-law student named Jade Lee who had adopted him as a best friend sometime during their freshman orientation and had not let go since. And he was, by all accounts, completely focused on the singular goal that had driven him his entire life, which was to be the first person in his family to graduate from a 4-year university with a degree and a future. There was no room in that plan for what was coming. It arrived on a Thursday in October, which in Chicago means the sky has gone the color of old pewter and the wind off Lake Michigan cuts through any jacket that cost less than $400. Kai was walking across the quad between his 10 a.m. media ethics lecture and his shift at the Meridian when he first noticed the new student. He did not know then that the word noticed was inadequate. You do not simply notice a presence like the one that had arrived on Blackwell's campus that week. You register it. The way you register a change in air pressure before a storm. The way every instinct in your body goes slightly alert without your permission. His name, as Kai would eventually learn, was River Seo. River Seo was 23 years old, Korean-American, and had transferred to Blackwell mid-semester from what his university registration listed as a school in the Pacific Northwest, though nobody at Blackwell could quite confirm the details when they tried to look them up later. He was a business major, or so his enrollment paperwork said. He kept to himself in a way that was too deliberate to be shyness. He was quiet in the way that powerful things are quiet, not because there is nothing there, but because there is so much there that it does not need to announce itself. His face was the kind of face that made you think of old photographs, defined, composed, arranged in an expression of such perfect stillness that it was almost uncomfortable to look at directly. He dressed simply dark jackets, clean lines, the kind of unassuming clothing that you later realize was quietly expensive. He moved through the campus like someone who already knew the layout of the building before he walked into it. People noticed him immediately, but nobody could explain exactly why he made them slightly uneasy. The first time Kai and River were in the same space together was in the Blackwell Library on a Wednesday night at around 11 p.m. Kai was working on a communications paper that was due at midnight, which tells you everything you need to know about how organized his life was at that particular moment. The library was essentially empty. And then, without asking, without acknowledging that there were 30 other available tables in the room, River Seo sat down directly across from Kai. Kai pulled out one of his earbuds. He looked up. River was already opening his laptop with the efficiency of someone who had already decided how this interaction was going to go. Kai said, very reasonably, that there were other tables. River said, also very reasonably, that he was already sitting at this one. What happened next was the thing that Kai would turn over in his mind for months afterward, because River looked at him then, fully, with the kind of direct eye contact that most people spend their whole lives avoiding, and he said something that no stranger had any business saying. He said that he had seen Kai that morning at the Meridian coffee shop, that he had been behind him in line, that Kai had given a free coffee to the homeless man who sat outside the building on cold mornings, and that he had done it quietly, without making a show of it, which River said he found interesting. Kai stared at him. He said that that was not normal behavior for a stranger. River agreed that it was not. And then he turned back to his laptop and did not say another word for the next 3 hours. He could not have told you why. That is often how it begins with the people who are most dangerous to us. Not with a threat, not with a warning, with something that feels, for reasons you cannot fully articulate, like recognition. Over the following 3 weeks, Kai began to notice a pattern that he told himself was coincidence. River Seo appeared to exist in many of the same spaces Kai did, at roughly the same times. The same section of the library, the same queue at the Meridian, the same side entrance of a humanities building after the morning rush. River never pushed for conversation. He never imposed. He was simply, quietly, consistently present. And every so often he would do something that lodged itself in Kai's memory like a splinter. One afternoon during a rainy walk across campus, River wordlessly extended his umbrella to cover both of them without slowing down or commenting on it. During a seminar study group that Kai had been dreading because he had not finished the reading, River provided the answer to a question that was directed at Kai before Kai could stumble through a response, doing it so smoothly that nobody in the group noticed it had happened. Late one night, Kai was sitting in a stairwell in the humanities building working through a financial aid issue that had suddenly threatened his scholarship, and he was crying the way that you cry when you are genuinely frightened, quietly, and without wanting anyone to see it. River appeared at the top of the stairwell, came down 3 steps, sat beside him on the concrete without asking, and handed him a water bottle. Kai told him he could go. River said he knew, and he stayed anyway, not saying anything, not asking anything, just sitting there in the stairwell at 1 a.m. until Kai's breathing steadied. What Kai did not know, what he had no possible way of knowing, was that every single one of those moments had been calculated. River Seo was not a regular transfer student. He was not on the campus of Blackwell University because of a late enrollment or a desire for a fresh academic start. He was there because his father had sent him. His father's name was Seo, and Seo was one of the most quietly powerful figures in the organized crime landscape of the greater Chicago metropolitan area, a man whose legitimate business holdings, which included a private security firm, a series of import-export operations, and several real estate holding companies across the North Shore, serve as a carefully maintained surface layer over financial operations that federal investigators had been trying to document for the better part of a decade. Seo had not risen to his position through flashiness or violence for its own sake. He had risen through precision, through patience, through the particular genius of someone who understood that the best way to stay invisible was to look exactly like everything you were not. River had grown up inside that world. He had not chosen it. He had been raised into it the way some children are raised into religion or into a particular set of expectations about who they're supposed to become, not because anyone asked whether they agreed, but because it was simply the atmosphere of the household. Seo was not a warm father, by every account that would later emerge through the investigation that followed. He was a man of profound control, a man who understood that the most effective way to manage the people around you is not to threaten them directly, but to make them feel that your approval was the only thing standing between them and a version of their life they could not bear to imagine. River had spent 23 years trying to earn a warmth from his father that his father had never once offered. And in the process, he had become exactly the kind of person his father needed him to be. Controlled, precise, unreadable, and very good at making people trust him. The reason River had been sent to Blackwell University was a man named Professor Daniel Park. Park was a tenured professor in the economics department, 54 years old, well regarded within the university, and for the past 3 years had been serving as what investigators would later describe as an unwitting but increasingly complicit financial conduit for Seo's operation. The mechanics of it were complex, routed through a university-affiliated research fund that Park administered, with shell company accounts that moved money in ways that did not look like money moving, which is the particular genius of financial crime done at high level. Park had initially been brought into the arrangement through what he believed was a legitimate research grant from a private investment firm. By the time he realized what he was actually facilitating, he had taken enough money and signed enough documents that extricating himself cleanly was not an option. When he tried to pull back from the arrangement, to slow the transactions, to create distance between himself and the accounts, Seo had noticed. And when Seo noticed things, he sent River. River's assignment was precise. He was to access the university, gain proximity to Park, retrieve the physical and digital evidence of the financial arrangement, and ensure that Park understood clearly that pulling back further would carry consequences he was not prepared to face. It was not a murder contract. Seo did not operate that way as a first resort. What it was an exercise in controlled intimidation, the kind that leaves no visible marks and no documentation, carried out by someone who had been trained since adolescence in the specific art of making people feel afraid without ever saying anything threatening directly. And that is where Kai Morrison entered the picture, because Kai Morrison was Professor Daniel Park's student research assistant. He had been assigned to Park's research team 6 months earlier through the university's work-study program. His responsibilities were administrative and minor: organizing data files, maintaining the research database, scheduling. He had no access to the financial accounts. He had no knowledge of what was being moved through them. He had read none of the documents that connected Park's research fund to Seo's operation. In every meaningful sense, Kai was completely innocent of any involvement in what was happening in that department. But his name was in the database. His university login credentials had been used to access the research files, not by him, but by someone who had obtained them. And his face had appeared in the hallway of the lower level of the Harmon Academic Building on a night when a meeting occurred that no one was supposed to witness. That night was a Thursday in November, the evening of Blackwell University's annual Autumn Social, the campus-wide event that everyone attended because everyone attended it, the kind of gathering where the social pressure to be present was strong enough that even people who would rather be home with their reading showed up. Kai was there for his column in the campus media organization, taking notes for a piece about student culture events. The rooftop venue was crowded and warm with the particular golden light of string bulbs strung between temporary structures, and the energy was the kind of reckless collective enthusiasm that only happens when a large group of people in their early 20s are all in the same place at the same time, pretending to be having more fun than they are. Kai left the rooftop to retrieve his jacket from the coat check on the lower level. The hallway down, there was quiet. Most of the building was empty. He was walking toward the coat check when he heard voices coming through the gap of a half-open service door off the main corridor. He registered them as tense before he registered them as recognizable. One voice was panicked, rapid, apologetic in the way that suggests real fear rather than social embarrassment. The other voice was quiet, measured, and utterly without effect. The kind of voice that doesn't need volume because the stillness of it is its own pressure. Kai stopped. He knew, rationally, that he should keep walking, that the correct and self-preserving thing to do was to get his jacket and go back upstairs and write his column and go to sleep. But he stopped, and through the gap in the door, he saw Professor Park at a table, hands shaking, sliding a small USB drive across the surface toward a third man Kai did not recognize. And he saw River Seo standing against the wall with his arms folded, watching with an expression on his face that Kai had never seen before. Every trace of the quiet, gentle presence that had walked beside him under an umbrella and sat with him in a stairwell was completely gone. What was in its place was something colder and more deliberate than anything Kai had ever encountered in another person at close range. River's head turned. Their eyes met through the gap. Kai ran. He did not make it far. River caught up to him at the stairwell in under a minute, not aggressively, not with violence, but with the efficiency of someone who had anticipated the outcome of the situation before it finished happening. He stopped Kai with a hand on his arm and told him to listen. He said that what Kai had just heard was not something Kai had heard. He said this in the specific, measured way of someone who is not making a threat, but is also not leaving room for any other interpretation. He said that if Kai went back upstairs, went home, and treated the evening as if nothing unusual had occurred, he would be safe. Kai asked him what he meant by safe. River looked at him for a moment with something moving across his face that was almost too complicated to name. And then he said, quietly, that the people he worked with were not people Kai wanted to be visible to. And Kai, standing in that stairwell with his heart hammering and his jacket still in the coat check and the noise of the party floating down from above them, asked him who he worked for. River said, just as quietly, his family. And then he asked Kai to go upstairs. Kai went upstairs. At 5:47 the following morning, Professor Daniel Park was found unconscious at the base of the service stairwell in the Harmon Academic Building. He had sustained a significant head injury consistent with a fall. Campus police were called. An ambulance was called. The initial determination was that Park had fallen accidentally, possibly after staying late and losing his footing on the stairs in the dark. He was hospitalized in serious condition. The university issued a safety alert asking students to avoid the area. By 7 a.m., every group chat on the Blackwell campus was already running wild with speculation. Jade Lee texted Kai at 6:04 a.m. and told him to turn on the campus alert app immediately. Kai was still awake. He had not slept. He read the notification and sat on the edge of his bed for a very long time without moving. The thing that you have to understand about what happened next is that Kai was not afraid in the way that fear usually presents itself, in the sharp, immediate way of someone who is in direct physical danger. He was afraid in the slower, more disorienting way of someone who has realized that the map they had been using to navigate their world was wrong, that the terrain was different from what they thought it was, that the person they had been quietly, cautiously, against their own better judgment beginning to trust was someone they did not understand at all. And that understanding this now, after having stood in a hallway and looked through a door at the wrong moment, had made him into something he did not know the name for yet. A witness, a variable, a problem. He did not know then that he had already been identified as exactly that,